working within the system to effect the change. Welcome to episode 3 of Liberty and Morality Defined. To use the rules of government to create freedom or to not? That is the question, for many in the liberty movement at least. So, what is the best way to effect a change for the better? Is it to vote, being elected, peaceful protests, agorism, writing literature, or making podcasts? I mean, what is the best way? Or is there a best way? Well, that would depend on how you wish to abide by your core philosophy. Are you going to completely and totally abide by your core philosophy? Or are you going to justify little contradictions of your core philosophy? Now, my core philosophy, if you've read Morality Defined, and I hope at this point that you have, is that I place value on my life. I want that value respected. I recognize that there must be other people in this world who also place value on their lives and want that respected. Because we choose to recognize this concept in one another, that's the foundation of morality. It is amoral. We simply just recognize one another, and we respect one another's consent to being interacted with 100% of the time as the default for any interaction. So, that being the case, and my core philosophy, the aforementioned examples of how to effect a change, some of them come with, catches, and don't exactly help the individual work within the framework or not violate that core foundation. And specifically of these, there's voting and being elected. But we'll tackle voting first. It'll cover more of the basics. So, voting. It's a noble idea, and, people are often so enthusiastic about it, and oftentimes they affect a fervorous attitude towards this practice. And I don't just mean people who promote government do this either. A lot of anarchists, voluntarists, small L libertarians, they find working within the system to be just as noble, just as good. It's not so much that I'm not going to say wrong to vote, but with the core philosophy that I maintain, it's in contradiction to that. Well, a lot of people will say, no, it's not. If you actually use the voting system, the whole measure, the whole ballot, the whole process, and you use it to effect a positive change that translates into the reduction of government, the reduction of an entity's violation of consent to being interacted with, it's not bad. It's not a contradiction of philosophy. But I'm going to argue against that and say, yes, it is. Even if you vote to remove red light cameras, even if you vote to remove fines and fees and permission slips, permits, building permits, even if you vote to remove on just ballot issues that remove positions and the expenditure of tax dollars, which make it so that it's possible to lower the taxes being imposed on a group of people, it's still immoral. It's still a violation of that amoral foundation, which I've explained. So, a lot of people will continue to fight, and they will say, well, no, it's not. You have to do something. And I will continue to say, yes, it is an immoral act, and this is why. The act of actually voting is not immoral. The act of reducing government is not immoral, but the foundation of that whole process is immoral. It's founded on the justification of violating people's consent in order to pay for all of that bread and circus appeal, to pay for that entire setup. Okay? Now, the taxation has to continue in order to provide those ballots, that platform. Taxation, this is a violation of consent to being interacted with, and it's also theft. So it's not just violating somebody's consent to being interacted with and them saying no. It takes it a step further and becomes theft. So that little violation of consent becomes a little bit bigger violation of consent, and then it's multiplied by however many millions of people that tax affects. So to do this, to use the system of voting as a means to effect a positive change, to essentially play the devil's game to try to beat the devil at his own rules, it's not going to work out very well most of the time. It likely will not work out very well on a larger scale, a national scale. You have better success the closer you bring this home, because it's easier to understand, to see the effects of the power in action. So, no matter what you choose to do, no matter what you're voting on, you're still justifying the violation of consent to be interacted with, at least for the purpose of taxation, and that is still immoral. By doing this, ultimately you're giving legitimacy, okay? You're granting credibility to the system's foundation, to that little violation of consent. And I know this is starting to sound like a broken record, but if you want to effect a real change without coming across as a hypocrite or opening yourself up to be a hypocrite, then you have to recognize this particular little act here. And it is such a powerful, magnificent thing that if you do not recognize it, it becomes a problem. Now, there's something else too. The whole time you're going through the process to vote, taxes are being collected. And this is another problem. Justifying that little foundation, that tiny little violation of consent, it's very dangerous. It's very dangerous. And because if you look at the laws, murder, okay? I know, that's a big leap from, well, paying taxes doesn't equate to murder. You're right, it doesn't. It absolutely doesn't equate to murder. But, guess what? Paying taxes or failing to comply with the paying of taxes has the same possible repercussion as committing murder and being caught. The death penalty could be applied to those who refuse to pay taxes, just as it could be applied to somebody who murders somebody else and gets caught by the legal system. And this is how it works. You fail to pay taxes, another fine, a heftier fine than the initial payment of taxes, becomes levied against you. Now, you have that fine levied against you, you refuse to pay it, and then the system implementing this violation of consent to interact with you and to ultimately steal from you, then ups the ante, increases its aggression, okay? Now, you refuse to pay. They say, well, we're going to kidnap you and take you to jail. They're going to throw you in jail. And if you resist that, then they are going to escalate the situation possibly to the point they're going to feel like they need to defend their lives because they believe they're in the right, or just doing their job, or just following orders, or whatever the justification is for violating your consent to being interacted with. They're completely and totally ignoring the foundation from which they're acting. And if they're not willing to listen to reason, then they're going to consider themselves being aggressed against unfairly, despite the fact that it's actually the other way around. They're aggressing against you. And if you resist that attempt to be kidnapped, then they could potentially execute you right there in the struggle and claim self-defense. So, by voting to work within the system, what you're ultimately doing is is just justifying that evil, okay? You're becoming one of them. It may not be what you're trying to do, but sadly, you go into the system trying to fight the good fight, and even if you come out uncorrupted on the other end, you ultimately still played the devil's game, and he won. He won because the devil's game is to get you to break your core philosophy and foundation. The devil's game is to cheat, to justify immoral acts, to justify hurting other people supposedly for a positive gain. Everybody's heard it. The road to hell is paved with good intentions. Well, that's the same thing here. Unfortunately, this road to hell, it's paved with good intentions by people who don't take the time to consider their actions all the way through. They don't look at the means. And then when they do, it's in hindsight supposed to be 20/20, but even hindsight is not 20/20 in this situation here. So many people just justify that tiny little consent. And if the devil can get you to violate or to break or to stray from your core foundation, from your core philosophy, and justify hurting other people, then the devil's already won. You can't fight fire with every single fire. It doesn't work that way. Sometimes, but ultimately fighting fire with fire doesn't work. Firefighters, I've used this example before, firefighters will use, they'll start a little small brush fire in order to clear a path. They'll control that very carefully, and if it's not a very windy day, but it's very dry outside, they'll control that fire, burn a swath of land, and they'll just let the other fire burn itself out. Basically, it's the equivalent of the Russians in pretty much every war that they fought against invaders from Europe, where they just burn their crops and fields in winter and retreat. It's that tactic right there. But we don't have to do that every time. Why justify destroying when we can create and create outside the rules? Don't give in to that. So ultimately, voting, it perpetuates the system. You play the devil's game, the devil is going to win, and it's not impossible to beat the devil at his own game. However, ultimately what happens is that when you use the devil's methods, when you use the government's methods, the government's going to change things at the last minute. We saw this in 2012 with the Republican National Committee, where Ron Paul was supposed to have had enough delegates in order to win. Well, the RNC pulled that out from under. They took it away. And ultimately, another individual was granted the candidacy, and that's because the whole system was afraid of the things that Ron Paul wanted to do. Ron Paul wanted to audit the Federal Reserve. He wanted to use executive orders to remove executive orders, so I'm under the impression that's the case. He wanted to actually reduce the system by using the system's rules against itself. And as you see, that didn't work out very well. But despite the fact that Ron Paul likely would have been a very good president if the powers that be in the unelected positions, but in the appointed positions, didn't come to him and threaten him and say, if you don't do X, Y, and Z and maintain these platforms, this is what's going to happen. Now, I have no idea what information the president is privileged to. I have no idea. Probably a lot of things, probably maybe nothing. Who knows? But what does it matter how much information the president is privileged to when the entire position is based on an immoral act, the violation of consent to being interacted with? So, a lot of people will say, well, it's better than doing nothing, and it's one of the most peaceful means that you can affect in order to make a change sometimes. Maybe. But it is not one of the most peaceful methods. It's more peaceful than not. But as I've explained with the example of the penalties for noncompliance with a tax law and the penalties for noncompliance with do not murder laws, both of them can result in the same thing. Now, the noble idea behind the do not murder law is to protect and to offer some sort of a fear-based incentive for people to not murder other people. Unfortunately, in order to enforce that same fear incentive has to be instilled into other individuals in order to feel coerced into paying these taxes. Especially if people decide that they look around. Okay, there's 10 million people in the area that I might live in, and how many murders are there? 10 a year? That's nothing. But what are the reasons behind those murders? Oh, people are high on drugs, or people are in a fit of unstable emotional rage. Bad things happen and there's no way to stop them. If making laws against murder stopped murder, I would be all for it. And I would absolutely drop my moral foundation. But that's not the way things work. And that was probably an exaggeration on my part. I probably still wouldn't drop that because I still don't want to have my consent to be interacted with violated no matter what anyway. So you see the ridiculous things that happen, the ridiculous claims of government to do a lot of things, and using fear to fight fear is, like I said, fire to fight fire. It's just not necessary 99% of the time. Yet I still encounter a lot of resistance with this. And somebody will ultimately come up and say, well, if you're on a slave plantation and the master decides that he wants to give his slaves the right to vote to improve their situation on what should be done, shouldn't you vote? There's a lot of issues with this analogy. I don't particularly like this analogy, and maybe I've explained it the wrong way. But this is what I understand so far. If a plantation owner, a master, is giving his slaves the right to vote on something to improve their lot, now these slaves must not understand and never have voted before, so they don't really understand what's going on. And they're going to vote for something that's completely and totally under the control of the master, because the master, after all, is controlling every aspect of this. So these slaves, they might actually, maybe they'll vote for something that could benefit them. But it's unlikely that the slaves, even if they were into unanimous thought, in say we want to remove the shackles and allow us to roam freely, it's not likely that the master is going to allow that. Or at least the master is probably not going to allow the slaves to give themselves too much freedom. They probably won't allow that to happen. Now, I understand very well how slavery in antebellum America worked. A lot of people today don't understand that, and they are going to chastise me and ridicule me for this, but it wasn't this harsh. People were not in chains on a daily basis every single day. It varied from plantation to plantation. Some plantation owners had the slaves, hey, this is just my lot in life. Just like today, people are, oh, well, we have to have government. That's just our lot in life. It was the same thing. It was a mindset. It was a complete and total mindset where it was just how things were. That was just life. And so they would produce and they would give 60% of whatever it is that they produce their master, or the master would set a quota for them and say, okay, well, you complete your quota. So long as you complete your quota for the day, you can have your little plot of land on my property, and you can do whatever you want with it. And you can even take whatever it is that you sell off your plot of land, and you can take it to the market and sell it and keep whatever it is you have. But so long as you make the quotas, I'm not going to bother you. And that's the way it was for a lot of plantations out there. So this might be more of where people are getting at in order to compare slavery back then to government and voting today. So even if the slaves were in unanimous decision about something, it's not entirely likely that the master of the plantation was going to allow too many votes to relinquish his control of the plantation there, or of the slaves. So, and if the slaves understood what voting could potentially do for them, then you would think that they would absolutely go all the way through with the process. And the same thing is true for today. If we think that voting is going to solve the problem, why aren't liberals and Tea Partiers and conservatives and Democrats and all of these groups, why aren't they finding common ground? Because all of them hate taxes. All of them don't want them. They want to reduce it, but they can never seem to agree on what to reduce taxes with. And the reason for that is because they're all trying to promote something or get something from the government. So they have to keep justifying these taxes, or they'll decide that, oh well, I need my health care, or I need my welfare, or I need my SNAP card, or I need my disability. There's always some reason why they can't budge on that, yet they all seem to hate the idea of having to pay. Nobody wants to pay. Everybody wants to live at the expense of the government, but seem to be at odds with each other about what to cut. But they want to cut whatever it is that doesn't affect them. And because they can't agree on that, it ends up just being a long drawn-out process where everybody bickers and complains to each other and nobody can actually agree on anything. And the same thing likely would happen on a plantation. So unless the vote was something along the lines of give us more pay or more free time and lower the quota, it's not likely that it was going to typically happen in such a way that they would be able to benefit themselves. And the same thing happens today. You're only going to be able to get so far with that voting because there are going to be people who are going to need, in order to they're going to need to keep that system in place. They're going to need that system there for whatever reason. They're going to make justifications for keeping it. And that's terribly unfortunate. So, at the end of the day, those comparing the whole idea of using the system, playing by the devil's rules, this government's rules, in order to effect a positive change, at the end of the day, it's going to fall flat. Because even if you do get elected, which is the next step here, if you're going to get elected, what's going to happen when you face a committee where the committee is overwhelmingly in support of not passing your bill because maybe your bill reduces their salaries to minimum wage or removes them completely and their positions? Who's going to actually vote for something like that unless there's something else in place already? I can tell you right now that the reason why you can't get rid of Social Security and you cannot get rid of these other problems or programs is because of the people currently receiving. And so by the time you have the people who are paying the people who are receiving today, because there's no pot, there's no coffer full of money, there's nothing in the in government coffers except for a bunch of IOUs borrowed from various programs. And right now it's so bad that they got IOUs shuffling around to pay IOUs. I mean, that's pretty bad. They can't even print enough money, it seems, in order to cover the problems. So, but what happens is the people who are paying now to support the people receiving ultimately get to that point, and then they decide, might as well collect, at least I'll get something out of it. They make the justification for, I paid my entire life, I didn't want to, but I'm going to get something out of it, so screw the next generation. And it just goes downhill from that. From that point. And it's sad, it's terribly unfortunate, and it should not happen that way. But that's ultimately what happens. So when you justify voting, you get into it, you get into the whole thing, and at the end of the day, you're still justifying and glamorizing and giving credibility and legitimacy to the foundation of government. That noble foundation of government that's designed to protect people. What's going on here is that you're going to justify that foundation of violating people's consent to being interacted with and to keep and maintain their property, because you're going to steal from these people. You're going to justify the theft in order to keep on with the bread and circuses and this wonderful show that we call voting. It's just smoke and mirrors at the end of the day to effect a positive change, because at the end of the day, when everything is said and done, people still had to be stolen from, still had to be threatened, and their lives, if they decided to not comply, their lives are still put at risk. Now, if everybody decided to, if a lot of people, 40, 50% of the population who's paying taxes decided to stop paying taxes, well, then we're talking. Now that might really affect the change. It might start a massive revolution. But then you would have people trying to defend their decisions to continue to receive Social Security and Medicare and disability and their government retirement programs. That's something that's terrible and shouldn't have to take place. So ultimately, at the end of the day, as far as I'm concerned, voting is still a violation of consent to being interacted with because of how it's paid for. Because of the whole entity, the whole idea of, well, we're going to use the system to work within the system, to break the system, to crumble the system using its own rules. But during the process, you're still granting legitimacy to the system by recognizing the immoral means that the system is utilizing. That's not helping anything at all. And I'm going to receive a lot of flack for this, and I'm okay with that. I'm okay with that because, you know what? Everybody's moral code and moral foundation essentially is based on what I have explained. That they value their lives. They want that respected. And the default for that should be 100%. Okay? Because if you don't have the default at 100%, then unnecessary, unwarranted conflict takes place. And you know what that unnecessary, unwarranted conflict is? Warring political factions trying to take over the government, killing innocents in the process. That's unnecessary, unwarranted conflict. So, because people cannot, they will not, they absolutely refuse to acknowledge that they have totally missed that boat on that concept. Or they've decided to justify violating that concept, that core principle. If you destroy, or if you tear apart every single religion and that we know about, and I mean most of them, I say at least 95% of religions, but I'm pretty sure it's higher than that. That's their core philosophy. The individual places value on his or her life, they want that respected, and then they seek to find other people who are like-minded to a certain extent, and then to interact with them and let them know, hey, look, I value my life and would like it respected. You value your life and want it respected. Can we agree to respect one another's life and not violate each other's consent to being interacted with? That right there is the core foundation of pretty much every human interaction between sentient creatures capable of reasoning. And I actually challenge you to find me an example that it's not the case, where the problem is that people simply choose to justify violating somebody else's consent to being interacted with outside of the realm of self-defense. I'm not saying there are not examples available, but I am saying that anybody who values their life and wants it respected, okay, in any amount, that amount has to default to 100% no matter what. So the subjectivity of how valuable they find their lives and how much respect they want it, what percentage of respect they want it applied to their lives, doesn't matter, because the default should be 100%, because everybody is going to have different concepts of the value they place on their lives. And the value they place on other lives doesn't matter as much, but because if they want that value on their life respected, they have to do the same in return. And since everybody's value on their life is up for determination, it's going to be based on the individual. My life's going to be worth more to me than your life is going to be worth to me. And I'm sure vice versa, because guess what? If I can't take care of me, I can't take care of you. And if you can't take care of you, you can't take care of me. So we have to look out for ourselves, so that default respect has to always be 100%. And so that's what ends up happening, is it becomes a problem. People justify violating that, and so that 100% becomes 99%, and then 90%, then 80%, then 40%, then 10%. And then the next thing you know, some lunatic with a short little mustache is ordering people to throw us into gas chambers, or some big bully who's got a chest full of medals and a funny-looking hat, and working in some jungle hut is screaming orders at people to have us strung up by a tree somewhere and shot. See, that's what happens when you justify that little violation of consent. Stuff like that happens. Sometimes it takes longer than other times to get to that point, but it oftentimes, almost always, it seems to be inevitable that that's the result of it. So the proper thing here would be to just stop violating the consent of people to being interacted with. And this goes towards actually working within the system to be elected too. So if you want to work within the system and you want to be elected, okay, that's fine. But you're going to have to pay for everything yourself. You're going to have to pay for all of your campaign. You're going to have to pay for your campaign and not take a single tax dollar for that. You're going to have to not take any compensation for this position. Every item that you use, you're going to have to pay for yourself or receive voluntary donations to, but receive no tax money. Okay? And then still, even then, you're going to have to abide by the rules to push that paperwork through the process. You're going to play the devil's game. You're going to play the government's game in order to get that bill through there. And what's going to happen is what I previously stated, where you're going to try to affect a change that's going to negatively affect somebody's pocketbook or their authority and power, and they're going to resist you because they think it's noble. Now, you can have some sort of a setup in place, and you can say, well, we can have voluntary donations put together and do crowdfunding for the people who are on government programs, and we could pay for those individuals but cut it off at that point. But no matter what, somebody may end up having to lose if enough funding isn't created. I'm one of those individuals. Personally, I will not take a Social Security check. At 35 right now, I'm telling you, I am not going to take a Social Security check. Now, it's entirely possible I can totally just go flip my lid and end up not having. I just decide to change my mind and say, screw it, let me be a hypocrite for all I care. I tried and I put up the good fight. If you can't beat them, join them. I don't know if that's going to happen to me or not. I have no idea. But right now, at this moment in time, as I'm recording this, I'm telling you absolutely that I, right now, am not going to take a Social Security check. I'm not going to apply. I'm not going to have anything to do with it because I don't want to be stealing from somebody else. The only money that I'm going to take is that which I was able to save if it wasn't stolen from me first. So, working within the system, it's great. And I'm not saying don't do it. I'm just simply saying, look, I'm not going to do it. I don't want to do it. I don't want to get involved with that. So go work through the system if you feel like you have to do it. But understand that because you value your life, understand that because you want the value in your life, okay, that you've placed on your life respected, and that you know other people feel the same, and that you know that consent to being interacted with should be 100%, unless you're changing that 100% figure to something else less than that within the realm of your own self-defense. Unless you're doing that, then you have no right to violate somebody else's consent. So ultimately, at the end of the day, what's going to happen is your core philosophy is going to be staring at you in the face, and you're going to be giving people cannon fodder for calling you a hypocrite in your own philosophy. And this is the problem. This is the problem with Rand Paul. This is the problem with Ron Paul. And don't get me wrong, people like Ron Paul are important, and we need gateways for that. He was a tremendous gateway for me in understanding finances and monetary policy. And without him, I probably would have taken a lot longer to understand those things. But I still cannot condone his actions in working within the system because it violates my core philosophy to be interacted with. Ultimately, it violates his, and pretty much everybody else's too. So this is going to be the problem here with voting and work and looking to get elected and to work within the system. Now, anybody who chooses to actually work within the system to be elected and to affect a positive change, look, I'm not trying to say that you're a bad individual. I understand. I get the point. I understand why you're trying to work within the system to affect a change. I really understand that. I do. Sometimes you feel like you're at a loss and you want to be able to do something. The progress, the pace of progress seems to be so incredibly dauntingly slow that it doesn't seem like you're able to affect a change. But if you take that attitude, it ultimately still becomes the flip side of the same coin that government is founded on. Oh, people just will not listen to reason. We need to do X, Y, and Z to protect ourselves against A, B, and C. So we're going to force them a little bit to comply. It's still the flip side of the coin. Well, we'll use those people that are already being forced to comply, and we'll use the things that they're forced to give up as means to to fight the system that's trying to coerce them into giving them up. It's still granting legitimacy, and it's writing a very fine line, but it's still on the side of immorality. And that's not okay. So, when people like Jeff Berwick, I think, the dollar vigilante fellow, when people like him decide that they want to run for office, I'm not going to chastise them and tell them, you're not a real anarchist or a real voluntarist or a real small L libertarian. You're a traitor to your country. No, I'm not going to do that, because I absolutely understand what it is that they're trying to do. And calling them out on these things doesn't really help the situation. But you know what helps the situation? Being able to explain their positions and why they're doing what they're doing, and pointing out the flaw in it. I understand they're just fed up with the system, and they want to effect a positive change. And they feel at this point in time, if they're engaging into the realm of politics the way it is, and trying to work within the system, that they're trying to effect a positive change because they kind of in some way lost hope. Or they believe it's just more beneficial. No matter what, they're still violating people's consent to being interacted with, and they're perpetuating the system. Again, it's the same coin that's the foundation of government, just the other side of it. And instead of using that foundation, create a new foundation. Do something different. Find out there are other ways to do things. Some of those things, peaceful protests, write literature, make podcasts, talk to people, make yourself available to answer questions, of course. You have to be able to do that. And that's what I do. People will tell me, well, if you're not going to vote or get involved, then you're part of the problem. You're stupid. Your philosophy is going to get people killed because you're not actually standing up and doing anything of importance and using actual actions to affect the change. So you're basically saying if you're not actually fighting against it, then you're being apathetic and you're empowering those by not actually doing anything. And that's not true. My core philosophy isn't justifying hurting anybody. And it's not apathy because I'm actually doing something about it. I'm making these audio shows. I'm writing other articles. I maintain multiple blogs. I've written 2 books, Morality Defined and Liberty Defined. I'm giving all of this stuff away for free. Letting people come and read it on their own will. And I've recognized the fact that I'm not going to be able to get back anything that the government has stole from me, and I'm not going to try to get it back, because the moment that the government took it from me, it was gone. So I'm not going to do any of that. I'm not going to try to exact revenge. I want allies in my fight, not more enemies. So if you recall in a previous episode, I talked about authority and how there are a number of people who, if you fight back against authority and you're not careful with the way you handle this, okay? And also another episode where I talked about language and tone and reputation. If you don't pay attention to these things, you're going to create unnecessary blowback. Now, I can go and I can take up arms against individuals like Jeff Berwick and be justified via the non-aggression principle because he's perpetuating a violation of consent, of my consent to being interacted with. But that doesn't help the situation any. It causes just blowback on my part. I would be justified in taking up arms against him and any other individual that perpetuates government, no matter the noble intent behind it, the means, because the means violate my consent to being interacted with through the perpetuation of taxation. Because that's the case, it doesn't. I can take up arms and be justified. Unfortunately, they're going to take up arms against me, call me the aggressor, because for whatever reason, they think that what they're doing is morally justified, because they're abiding by that same foundation of government. That which said, well, we have to justify little consent to be able to save these people. You have to be consistent. And you absolutely can be consistent. Oh, well then you're just a purist, cold-hearted, expletive. Okay, if that's the way you choose to see it, that's fine, but I didn't start all these problems. I didn't engage in any of these problems and perpetuate them with intent. And the moment that I realized that I was perpetuating these things and it was a mistake on my part, I withdrew and stopped. And now I'm trying to make amends. So any negative things that I did, I have paid for since then, and then some, and am going to continue to pay for them because I'm going to put out these episodes. I'm going to continue to write and share literature and make myself available for as long as I can tolerate it. So I'm paying for it, and I don't have a problem with that, and it makes me feel good on the inside to do it. So instead of going out and chastising these people and berating them and trying to create conflict or to maintain the conflict that they are initiating against me, I'm just grinning and bearing it. I'm putting up with it for the time being. Again, I want allies. I don't want enemies. I want allies. And the best way to create allies is to show them that you understand, to show them that you are trustworthy, to build that foundation of trust. I'm not talking about keep your friends close and your enemies closer. I don't even want to get into any of that, because most of that it seems like it's about destruction. Now, I could be wrong, but it seems like it's about controlling destruction and chaos. And I'm not interested in a whole lot of that. Perhaps maybe I just don't understand it well enough. I don't know. But what I do understand is that I want to create. I don't want to destroy, because that's the problem. There's too much destruction. Too many people are justifying swinging a sword around all the time instead of pushing a plow. They forget that in order to be able to push that plow, sometimes you have to swing a sword, but it has to be in defense. So if you take your intellect and your time and your labor and you create primarily and only destroy when your means of creating are being threatened unjustly, then everything will be fine. That respecting of consent to being interacted with 100% of the time is what's important. But peacefully protesting like I'm doing is not the only thing that you can do that's different, that doesn't violate or come at odds with the core foundation that I've explained here. There's other things. Agorism is one of them. And we all partake in this to a certain, to varying degrees, I suppose. But agorism, according to many popular libertarian, small L libertarian sites, is something along the lines of a social philosophy that pretty much pushes the creation of groups and the transformation of a society into one that respects all voluntary interactions between individuals. Usually it's a means of counter-economics, and counter-economics being the practice of peaceful interactions and exchanges between individuals, respecting consent, and engaging in practices that are typically forbidden by legalities in order to destroy the system as peacefully as possible, only taking up arms usually in self-defense, immediate self-defense, and usually educating those who try to attack you. And the educating part I don't see on as many websites, but I would definitely like to encourage that. Knowledge is power for sure, especially if you know how to apply it and when to apply it, in which case it becomes wisdom. So, get paid under the table. Get paid with cash. Use alternate currencies. Try to use multiple currencies in addition to bartering when making deals and economic exchanges with people. There's a lot of things that can be done in order to peacefully resist the system. But at the end of the day, it's understood that violence may still have to be left on the table. Ultimately, if it's not, then what's to stop these people who are absolute 100% overzealous proponents of government? They don't understand that they are becoming the monsters to you and me, that they fear others, including us, could potentially become to them. And they just don't see it. And it's very sad, and which is why I've put a focus and emphasis on actually educating people, why I prefer voluntary interactions, and why I give away so much of my work for free. So, I hope that helps out with your understanding of why I think working within the system is a problem, especially voting and getting elected. Now, I don't have an issue, and I'm not trying to say that people like Libertarian Girl, Austin Peterson, and Ron Paul, and Jeff Berwick are bad people. No, absolutely not. I'm sure they have the most noble of intentions at heart. Unfortunately, if they're going to perpetuate a system that is based on the violation of consent plus theft in order to effect a positive change, even if that positive change is to protect people by promoting a centralized government or set of governments, or even promoting the decline and the dismantling of these governments in order to bring more freedom, both of those things are still founded on the same idea. They're just working on different sides of that same coin. And that's not something that is ultimately going to win the day over. These people are great gateways for individuals, but they stop short. They stop short, I guess, in part because they for many reasons. I'm not even going to speculate on the reasons, but there's just so many reasons out there. But if you want to affect a change, you have to start at the most local level. And what is the most local level? The individual, you and me. So this isn't about being a purist jerk. This isn't about being better than other people and going out there and puffing up your chest and yeah, I'm better than you. No, this is about trying to be the change in the world that you want to see, leading by example and by voice, and making sure that your actions and your voice are in lockstep with one another. That's what's important. So if we don't affect that change in ourselves first, then it doesn't matter how many times we vote. It doesn't matter what kind of elected leader that we ultimately can be. Because our example and our voices, our actions and our voices are going to be at odds with one another, and they're going to cause a problem. Which is exactly guess what? Rand Paul is experiencing right now. Because he is being ripped apart, left and right and center, and it is just not pretty. And I feel bad for the guy. I really do. He has a lot of courage to get up there and do the things that he's doing, but the way he's being attacked is unfair, but it isn't unjust, because he is still justifying violating people's consent to being interacted with by working within the system, as I have explained in this episode. Well, that concludes this episode. If you have enjoyed it and would like to show a little appreciation, by all means, please visit my website, www.jimlimberdavis.com. Donate. Share this message with friends, other liberty-minded individuals, and government proponents alike. Also, if you have any questions or comments, leave them in the comment section below if you're watching this on YouTube, or send them to me, or like my Facebook blog, facebook.com/libertydefined. Ask me questions there. Ask me questions also on Twitter, at JimLimberDavis. And if you would also like to have me speak about or give my insights on other topics, let me know, and I will add that to the queue. Until next time, thank you very much.